Go.
Hi everybody, welcome to Gigi's Place. Only today we're in Mrs. B's classroom and I have some new friends I want you to meet. But I gotta meet them first. So, sir, what's your name?
10.
10?
Yeah.
And yours?
8.
What's your name?
7.
Oh my goodness. Okay, one more question. How old are you?
Cheeseburgers.
How old are you?
Taco.
And you?
Chocolate.
And one more, last question. What's your favorite food?
Ren.
Ren. What's your favorite food?
Jordan.
And yours?
Addison.
These kids are really mixed up. But you stay tuned because I'm going to read you a really funny story about a crazy mixed up trip to the zoo. Hi there. It's raining outside. Can you see my umbrella? It's a little upside down and mixed up, isn't it? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Something very upside down and mixed up. Are you ready? I'm going to read you a book. It's called A Very Different Trip to the Zoo. Can you see? Mr. and Mrs. Camel and their son Tony were getting ready for an outing. Tony was so excited. It was his first trip to the zoo. Have you ever been so excited you could hardly sleep? Tony couldn't sleep hardly the night before. Mrs. Camel packed a picnic basket. What do you suppose camels eat? Now, if you say grass, I'm going to tell you there's not a whole lot of grass in the desert. Mr. Camel got the car ready. Car? They packed lots of water because everyone knows camels need a lot of water. Mr. Camel drove carefully through the busy streets. When they arrived at the zoo, they parked the car and collected all their things. Tony had a camera, some snacks, and a hat in his backpack. When they arrived at the gate, Mr. and Mrs. Camel saw a big sign over the ticket booth that said, "No chickens allowed." Their mouths dropped open and they stared and stared. Mr. Camel spoke to the man in the ticket booth and he said, "Why are chickens not allowed in the zoo?" The ticket man said, "They're dirty, they're smelly, and they carry diseases. And we don't want our zoo visitors or our animals to be exposed to them." Mr. Camel said angrily, "That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. They are people just like we are." People? "I'm sorry, but we will not be coming to this zoo." The ticket man said coldly, "Your loss. Try the zoo on the other side of the tracks." They take anybody. Mr. and Mrs. Camel guided Tony back to the car. They drove in silence all the way back towards their home, through the busy streets and across the railroad tracks. They arrived at the other zoo and parked their car under a nice shady tree. This time, they walked with happy steps toward the ticket booth. There were no signs on the walls that said any person was not welcome. With a smile, Mr. Camel handed in his money and paid for their admission to the zoo. Inside, they sat on a bench with their maps and decided what to see first. Tony had a drink of water and put on his hat and sunglasses. Mrs. Camel put the picnic basket in her backpack, and Mr. Camel carried all the water. Mr. Camel noticed that this zoo was divided into 5 major areas. After studying the map for a bit, they decided the first place they would visit was the biggest area in the zoo. The sign on the glass said, "Disabled." Can you say that? Disabled. Inside were animals of all colors and ages, some with odd walking sticks, some in chairs with wheels on them, some with sticks under their front legs. Some of them only had 2 legs. Some had only 3. Tony asked a lot of questions as he and his parents stood in front of the huge area. It has trees and sidewalks and large pools of water, but the animals inside did not look very happy. It made Tony very sad. He had never seen anything like this before. These disabled animals didn't look dangerous, but Mr. Camel said if they're in the zoo, they belong behind the glass wall. Next, they came to an area labeled colored/white. Mr. Camel explained that the zoo didn't consider white a color, so that's why they were separated into two areas. Tony noticed that these areas weren't as large as the one they'd just seen, and the animals inside seemed very much like the ones in the disabled area, only they didn't have wheels and odd sticks. They wore colorful clothing and sparkly things around their necks and front legs. Tony's father said those front legs are called arms with animals. Tony watched the young ones playing and the old ones reading books or playing an odd game with balls and sticks. They seemed happy enough and certainly looked healthy. Tony didn't think these animals looked dangerous either. The next cage was marked curiosities. Can you say that word? Curiosities. With words Tony didn't understand, like tattoos, beards, oddly colored hair, and piercings. Tony's dad tried to explain each of these hard words. Tony thought these animals looked just like the ones in the other cages, except more colorful. As they walked, Tony was getting more and more confused. The next cages were marked anomalies. Can you say that? Anomalies. This was another word Tony didn't understand. His father explained that an anomaly was something different from normal, whatever people decided normal was. So the animals in these cages were either very tiny, very tall, very skinny, or very, very large. Each one of the categories was in a separate cage. They had food and water and beds that were just the right size. They looked very lonely to Tony. The last big area in the zoo was called slow. Tony had to ask his dad what that meant. Mr. Camel said that these were the most dangerous animals of all, the ones who had problems with their brains. Tony thought these were the saddest animals of all. Many of them just sat in the corner of their cages and silently watched all the families walk by. But one group were so very happy they were smiling and waving at all the onlookers. Tony didn't think any of them looked very dangerous. At the end of the day, the camel family were very exhausted. They had seen so much and walked so far. Tony had to be carried to the car on his dad's back. He just didn't understand why all these animals were in cages. They all looked alike to him, with skin instead of fur like he had, eyes, ears, feet. They had arms instead of front legs, and hands with what his dad said were fingers. And instead of lovely hard hooves like he had, these animals had soft feet, and they all wore something on their feet his dad said were called shoes. They wore things to cover their bodies, and their hair was mostly on their heads. But as far as Tony could see, none of them looked very dangerous. He fell asleep thinking maybe it would be better for them if there were no cages and they all lived happily together. What do you think about this zoo? Do you think we humans put people in cages based on how they look? What can we do to change that? Have you ever been afraid of someone because they didn't look like you? We certainly don't need to be afraid just because someone has a different color skin or their hair is different. Did you notice Gigi's hair is different? Or they have tattoos or piercings. However, and listen carefully to Gigi, there are safety rules that all of us need to follow. Look at this one. What does it say? Put on your armor. When? Every day. Now, if you don't know what put on your armor means, you need to go back to the place where all the YouTube videos are listed that Gigi's done, because I have one about the full armor of God. It's very silly when I get all dressed up in my armor. But God has given us pieces of armor that we can put on every day that will help us when bad thoughts come in, bad feelings come in. Here's a big rule. Do not get separated from your group. Always, always, always make sure there's someone with you. A teacher, a parent, a brother or sister. It doesn't count if you have your baby brother with you. Understand? Someone older or a friend. Okay? Always. And lastly, the most important is to remember to follow all the safety rules that your mom, your dad, your teacher at school, and your Sunday school teacher, if you go to church, all the rules that you've been taught. Gigi met a little boy, or saw a little boy in the grocery store one day, and he was sitting in a trolley, in a grocery trolley. And so I stopped to talk to him. Hi, how are you? How old are you? And, you know, things like that. Just like that, his dad was standing right beside him. Because you know why? I'm a stranger to them, right? You gotta remember, follow all the safety rules. God gave us a brain, and He wants us to use them. And He wants us also to love each other. Whether we're dark-skinned or light-skinned, whether we have blue hair or green hair or tattoos all over our face, it's different, but it's not always bad. I wanted to show you this, but I'm trying not to eat sugar, so I don't have any jelly beans or gumballs. But you can imagine with me that if we had a whole bowl full of jelly beans, all different colors, when you cut them open, guess what? They're all the same color on the inside. We are all people that God has created, and He gave each and every one of us special gifts. Now, even though Tony and his family went to a very crazy mixed up zoo, I hope this gives you something to think about the next time you see someone that's a little bit different than you are. Someone who maybe doesn't have both legs. Someone who maybe has tattoos or holes and piercings and things all over them. Someone who maybe doesn't look like you. Maybe their eyes are different. Maybe their skin is a different color. I want you to remember, we are all God's kids. He has no favorites. I like to say that I'm His favorite, but you can say the same thing. He has no favorites. He loves us all the same, and He wants all of us to be kind to each other, to love each other, because loving others is what proves that we love Him. Let me pray for you. Father God, on this beautiful rainy afternoon, I want to say thank you for creating us all so differently. Different colors, different sizes, different eyes. It'd be kind of boring if we all looked the same. Just like when my friends go to the real zoo, it'd be kind of boring if there were only bears or only lions or only elephants. But to see the varieties of your creation is amazing. Help us to love each other, to treat people kindly, because we want to show the rest of the world that we love you. In Jesus' name. So don't you forget, when you see someone who looks a little bit upside down, that your job is to love them. Have a wonderful week. Bye.
Wow, that was a really mixed up story, but I get it.
Me too, I think. Me too. We need to be kind to everyone, no matter how they look.
And remember to follow safety rules.
Thanks for watching. See you next time on Gigi's Place.